What could make a man, a trained soldier, freeze in fear at the sound of something as harmless as rain? Not gunfire, not explosions, not the chaos of a battlefield, but rain. A soft drizzle tapping against a window in the middle of a quiet American town. Have you ever felt that when something ordinary suddenly grips your body like a vice, pulling you back to a place you thought you'd left behind? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover now may surprise you. Picture this. It's late evening in a small house on the outskirts of Virginia. The streets are empty, the kind of calm you could almost frame and hang on a wall. Inside, a man sits in an armchair, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hands. He's home from the war, medals neatly stored in a box he hasn't opened in years. Outside, the rain begins. At first, just a few drops against the roof, then a steady rhythm. His fingers twitch. His grip on the cup tightens. His breathing changes. The sound isn't loud, but it's enough. His jaw clenches. His shoulders stiffen. And without warning, his body trembles not from cold, but from something buried deep in his mind. Have you ever experienced that sudden shift, when your senses seem to betray you, dragging you back into memories you never asked to revisit? That's the thing about the mind, it hides things. It stores moments in dark corners and locks them away. But the keys? They're everywhere. In a scent, a flicker of light, or the sound of rain against glass. This soldier had spent years believing the war was behind him. He had walked the streets of his hometown again, sat at diners with old friends, and learned to smile for photographs without thinking about who was missing from the frame. But trauma has its own clock, and it doesn't care about calendars. Every time the skies opened up, his body reacted before his thoughts could catch up. He didn't understand why, not yet. All he knew was that something as peaceful as a rainy day could turn his world into a minefield of invisible dangers. And maybe you've been there too, your own way. Maybe you've felt that quiet panic creep in without reason. Maybe a sound, a smell, or a certain place stirred something in you that you couldn't quite explain. That's why you need to hear this story, because it's about more than just one man's fear. It's about the hidden ways our past can reach out and grab us, even when we think we've moved on. For him, the rain wasn't just weather, it was a signal, a trigger. A bridge between two worlds, the quiet life he was trying to build, and the chaos he thought he had left thousands of miles away. And the strangest part? He didn't remember the exact reason why. Not yet. The memory was there, locked behind layers of time and survival instinct, waiting for the right moment to surface. What happens when that memory finally breaks through? When the reason for the fear steps out of the shadows and stands in front of you, undeniable. That's where this journey takes a turn. Stay with me, because the moment you hear what he discovered about himself, you might start looking at your own life differently. And so, on that night in Virginia, as the rain drummed harder on the roof and the storm rolled in, he sat frozen in his chair, staring at the window. The sound was everywhere, on the glass, on the ground, in his chest. His mind was about to take him somewhere he hadn't been in years. And once he got there, nothing would ever be the same again. The rain that night seemed endless, each drop like a tiny drumbeat pulling him deeper into a place he didn't want to go. His eyes stayed fixed on the glass. But what he was seeing wasn't the street outside, was something far away. Something years old. Something his mind had carefully folded and stored away. He could feel it pressing against the edges of his memory, asking to be let in. And in that moment, I can't help but wonder, have you ever felt that too? That strange, unshakable pull toward a memory you don't fully understand, yet somehow it shapes you even now. If this topic resonates with you, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own experience, your opinion, or even just the feeling you get listening to this. Your words matter not just to me, but to everyone who finds strength in knowing they're not alone. When you speak up, you might be giving someone else the courage they've been waiting for. And if this story is touching something inside you, if you believe these conversations are worth having, take a second to like this video. It's such a simple gesture, but it tells me, keep going. It lets me know that this is a space worth building. And when you subscribe, you're not just following a channel, you're joining a community that's here to explore the hidden corners of our stories, to uncover the lessons we didn't even know we were carrying. Your participation is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who might be searching for the same kind of understanding you are right now. Because the truth is, stories like this one can't live in silence. They need to be heard, shared, passed along. And the more we do that, the more we remind each other that healing doesn't happen alone, happens together. Outside, the rain kept falling. The soldier's hands were still, but inside his chest, his heart was racing. Something was about to break open, something that had been waiting for years to be seen. And when it did, it would change everything. Chapter 1. The soldier. He wasn't always like this. Years ago, before the war, he was the kind of man who loved the rain. He'd leave his porch door open during summer storms, letting the cool air roll through the living room. Born and raised in Ohio, he grew up knowing the steady rhythm of Midwestern weather. Warm springs, humid summers, crisp autumns. Rain was part of the soundtrack of his life, something comforting, grounding. But that was before his name was stitched onto a uniform and before he boarded a plane bound for a desert half a world away. His unit was sent to one of the most volatile regions during the final years of his service. Dust, heat, and the constant hum of uncertainty became his reality. There were long stretches of nothing, the kind of nothing that makes you hyper-aware of every sound and shadow, followed by moments of chaos so sudden that your body didn't have time to process the shift. It was a place where normal rules didn't apply, where trust was something you rationed, and safety was a luxury you couldn't afford to believe in. For 12 months, Hay lived in that suspended state, alert, cautious, calculating every move. Out there, the weather was different. Rain was rare, but when it came, it was fierce. Heavy drops hitting the earth with a force that turned dirt into thick, clinging mud. And for him, one of those storms carried with it a moment that would carve itself into his memory so deeply. It would follow him home without him even knowing it. When his deployment ended, he came back to a quiet neighborhood not far from where he grew up. The streets looked smaller somehow, like they'd shrunk in his absence. Neighbors welcomed him with cautious smiles, unsure of what to say beyond the usual "thank you for your service." He tried to pick up where he'd left off, working at the local hardware store, catching a game on TV, meeting old friends for a beer. On the outside, it seemed like he'd managed the transition. But inside, he felt like a stranger in his own life. The thing about coming home from a place like that is no one prepares you for the stillness. After months of tension and unpredictability, the quiet feels unnatural, almost dangerous. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced he'd heard something outside. He'd scan the room before remembering where he was. Most days, he kept the unease tucked away, hidden behind small talk and polite nods. But then came the first time it rained. It was late autumn, the kind of day where clouds gather low and the air smells like wet leaves. The sound of rain on the roof started off soft, harmless. But within minutes, his body betrayed him, hands trembling, chest tightening. That familiar rush of adrenaline flooding his system as if he were back on patrol. He didn't understand it. How could something so ordinary provoke a reaction so visceral? He told himself it was nothing, just a fluke. But the pattern repeated, each rainy day pulling him into the same physical storm. He avoided telling people about it. How do you explain that your worst moments aren't triggered by fireworks or crowded streets, but by weather? It didn't make sense, not even to him. So he lived with it, hoping it would pass. But with each season, the reactions grew harder to ignore. It wasn't just the trembling knit, was the way his mind seemed to detach, pulling him somewhere far away without his permission. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the truth is, these moments aren't random. They're the result of something our mind does without asking for our consent. Trauma isn't just about the events we survive, about how our body decides to remember them. And it doesn't keep memories in neat, orderly boxes labeled safe and dangerous. Instead, it stores them in pieces, sounds, smells, sensations fragments scattered across the subconscious. That's why a certain scent can make someone cry without knowing why, or why a song can make you feel both comforted and uneasy at the same time. In his case, the rain had become a symbol he didn't understand. Somewhere in the vast filing system of his memory, rain had been paired with something else, something heavy, life-altering. His conscious mind had pushed the moment down, burying it deep enough to survive. But his body never forgot. And when the conditions lined up just right, the patter of water, the muffled acoustics of a storm, those buried instructions lit up like a signal flare. This is the hidden truth behind so many invisible battles. It's not always about what you remember. It's about what your body insists on feeling. That's why transformation after trauma isn't just a matter of willpower or positive thinking. It's a slow journey of untangling what's been wired together under extreme conditions. It's about learning the behind-the-scenes mechanics of your own survival instinct and making the decision to meet it with curiosity instead of fear. He didn't know it yet, but understanding this connection would change everything for him. It would open doors he didn't realize were locked, giving him not just answers, but a sense of control he hadn't felt in years. And once you glimpse that kind of shift, it's impossible to go back to the way things were. Comment here. This makes sense to me. If you've ever felt your body remember something your mind had tried to forget. Chapter 2. The strange reaction. It didn't take long for him to realize this wasn't a one-time thing. The trembling returned with precision, as if the rain itself had a direct line to some hidden switch inside him. It could be the light drizzle of an early spring morning or the heavy downpour of a summer storm. Either way, the effect was the same. His breathing would shift first, almost imperceptibly, like his body was bracing for something. Then came the tightening in his chest, the shallow inhale that refused to let air in fully, and the faint shake in his hands that no amount of willpower could stop. He would try to mask it, clenching his fists in his pockets, rubbing his palms against his jeans. But the truth was, his entire body was on high alert, even on days when he tried to carry on as usual, making coffee, reading the paper, or heading to the store. He could feel the storm pulling at the edges of his attention. Every drop on the windshield was a drumbeat, steady and relentless, and the harder the rain fell, the more his heart raced. It wasn't fear in the way most people imagine it. It was something deeper, something wired into him like an alarm system that wouldn't turn off. His logical mind knew he was safe, but his nervous system was already halfway across the world, reacting to a danger that no longer existed. Sometimes it would hit him in public. He'd be standing in line at the grocery store when the first rumbles of thunder rolled in, the fluorescent lights above, the hum of the refrigerators, the chatter of strangers. All of it would fade under the sound of rain hammering the roof. His shoulders would tense, his eyes scanning unconsciously, searching for exits, his feet almost ready to move without his permission. To anyone else, he just looked distracted. But inside, it felt like standing on the edge of something vast and invisible, unable to explain why his pulse was pushing so hard against his skin. The strangest part was how automatic it all felt. There was no moment of recognition, no sudden flash of memory, just an overwhelming physical certainty that something was wrong. He could go from relaxed to rigid in seconds, like his body was always waiting for a signal, and the rain provided it perfectly. It didn't matter if he was inside, miles from any danger, wrapped in the warmth of his home. The reaction came. Anyway, and it wasn't just the physical sensations. There was a mental shift too, a subtle but powerful rewiring of the present moment. His thoughts would cloud over, losing their sharpness, and a vague unease would creep in. Sometimes he'd find himself holding his breath without realizing it, listening not for the rain itself, but for what might follow. His mind would start building a map, predicting angles, imagining what was coming next, as if he were back on patrol. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this is where the hidden truth of triggers reveals itself. The body doesn't wait for permission to respond. It acts on patterns burned into it by experience. And once those patterns are there, they can be reactivated by the smallest cue. That's the behind-the-scenes mechanism most people never see. You could call it muscle memory, but it's more than that side survival memory. It's the body's way of saying, I've been here before, and I'm going to keep you alive, whether you like it or not. The impact of this goes beyond the obvious discomfort. It starts to shape your decisions without you realizing it. He began rearranging his days to avoid being caught outside when the forecast predicted rain. He would check the weather obsessively, plan errands for sunny hours, and quietly decline invitations if there was even a hint of a storm. On the surface, it looked like practicality. Underneath, it was an entire mindset built around avoiding a trigger he didn't fully understand. This is where the transformation becomes possible, but only if you first recognize what's happening. Most people assume change starts with motivation, but in cases like this, it starts with awareness. Without that, you're just reacting on autopilot, letting an old memory you can't even name dictate the way you move through the world. And that's the part no one talks about, the silent negotiations we make with ourselves just to feel in control. For him, the realization that something deeper was at play didn't come in one dramatic moment. It came gradually, in the quiet noticing of patterns, in the way his mind started connecting the dots between rain and reaction. That's when the question shifted from what's wrong with me to what happened to me. And that shift is where the real journey begins. Right here, I'm on this journey too. If you've ever noticed a reaction in yourself that didn't make sense until you started looking closer. Chapter 3. The hidden trigger. What made it so hard to understand was the fact that rain, to most people, was harmless, comforting. Even for some, it's the sound of lazy mornings of coffee brewing and a book in hand. For him, it had become something else entirely. And that's the hidden truth about trauma. It doesn't care how ordinary the thing is. It can take something familiar, something safe, and quietly rewire it into a warning signal. That's how triggers work. They slip into everyday life, disguised in plain sight. A trigger isn't always dramatic. It's not just fireworks exploding on the 4th of July or the sudden pop of a car backfiring. It can be the smell of diesel, the slam of a door, a certain pattern of light through a window. And once the brain makes that connection, once it pairs a neutral stimulus with a moment of danger, those wires are hard to untangle. The body remembers the danger before the mind does. That's why, when it rains, he doesn't just hear water. He hears everything that once followed it. When people think of PTSD, they often imagine flashbacks, sudden, vivid replays of the past. But more often, it's less like watching a movie and more like your body hijacking the present. The pulse quickens, muscles tense, breathing changes, and before you even know why, you're ready to run, hide, or fight. For veterans, those triggers can hide in the smallest corners of civilian life. A trip to the grocery store, a walk in the park, a quiet evening at home when the weather shifts. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the way these triggers form is both fascinating and unsettling. When you've lived in a high-stress environment, one where your survival depends on instant reaction, your brain starts linking details together. It learns to scan for patterns, to predict danger before it fully arrives. This is a survival mechanism, an ancient part of our wiring that kept our ancestors alive. But in a war zone, it operates at full volume. Every sound, every smell, every shift in the environment is noted and cataloged. And if something dangerous happens during one of those moments, your brain stamps that sensory input with a warning label that never fully fades. In his case, rain wasn't the danger itself, which was the backdrop. The real event happened years before, but it unfolded under that same constant rhythmic sound. His mind recorded the rain along with everything else from that day. The tension, the urgency, the feeling that the next few minutes might determine whether he lived or died. And once that connection was made, rain became the cue, the spark that set the old fear burning again. This is the part of the journey that few people see from the outside. Friends and family might notice he's a little quieter on rainy days, or that he avoids certain situations, but they don't feel what he feels. They don't understand that for him, it's not a choice, it's a physiological chain reaction. And no matter how much he tells himself he's safe, his body doesn't believe it. That's why healing isn't as simple as getting over it. It's about rewiring the connection, retraining the nervous system to stop interpreting the present through the lens of the past. The impact of triggers is something that reaches far beyond veterans. Anyone who's lived through intense fear or loss can develop them. It could be a scent, a place, a song, anything the brain has quietly filed under danger. That's why understanding them matters, not just for those who served, but for anyone navigating the aftershocks of a difficult chapter in their life. Because once you can see the pattern, you can start making decisions from awareness instead of avoidance. And that shift, small as it sounds, can be the beginning of real transformation. For him, recognizing that the rain was more than just weather was a turning point. It didn't fix the problem overnight, but it gave the fear a name. And sometimes, naming a thing is the first step to loosening its grip. That's when the journey toward change began, not with force, but with curiosity. Not by pushing the fear away, but by slowly leaning into it, asking what it had been trying to say all these years. Right here, this makes sense to me. If you've ever noticed something ordinary carrying a meaning only you could feel. Chapter 4. Digging into the past. At first, he tried to brush it off. Rain was just rain, he told himself. Maybe it was. The gray skies affecting his mood? Maybe it was some leftover anxiety from years of high alert. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, he knew better. The reactions were too precise, too consistent. They didn't show up on sunny days, didn't creep in when the air was dry. They belonged to the storms alone. And the more he noticed them, the harder they were to ignore. The turning point came one night in early winter. The rain had been falling for hours, tapping steadily against the roof, filling the silence of his living room with its hypnotic rhythm. He was sitting there, staring at the muted television, coffee growing cold in his hands, when the familiar tension wrapped around his chest. His breathing shortened. His vision seemed to narrow. He could almost hear something behind the rain feint. Muffled, but persistent. He leaned forward, trying to shake the feeling, but it only deepened. And in that moment, he realized he couldn't keep pretending this was nothing. That's when he made the decision to start digging. Not recklessly, not by tearing open every sealed box in his mind at once, but by paying attention. He began keeping track of the moments it happened, where he was, what he was doing, what the weather was like. He started noticing smaller details. 2. How the smell of wet pavement seemed to intensify the unease. How distant thunder could set his heart racing even when the storm was still miles away. The more he watched, the clearer the pattern became. Eventually, he decided to talk about it. That wasn't easy. For years, he'd kept his thoughts locked up, avoiding conversations that might lead too close to the subject. But one night, over beers with an old friend from his unit, he let something slip. His friend didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss it. Instead, he leaned in, his expression shifting in that subtle way that only comes from understanding. "Yeah," he said. "I get it. For me, it's the smell of diesel. Every time." It was such a simple exchange, but it cracked something open, proof that he wasn't alone in this. Encouraged, he decided to bring it up with his therapist. They'd been meeting for months, working on smaller pieces of the puzzle, but this was the first time he'd connected his reactions so clearly to a single element. The therapist listened carefully, asking him to describe exactly what happened in his body, what thoughts came up, and how long it lasted. Then she explained something that would change the way he saw it. Triggers don't have to be logical to be powerful. They're not about what makes sense, now they're about what made sense in the moment. Your brain first decided to pair that sound, smell, or sight with danger. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because what he was uncovering was more than just a quirk of memory, was a direct link between his present self and a moment his mind had been protecting him from. In therapy, they began exploring his time overseas, not as a neat chronological story, but as a landscape filled with moments that still carried weight. He remembered long nights on guard duty, the cold creeping into his bones, the distant hum of machinery, the faint crackle of radios. And then, slowly, a specific night began to emerge. It had been raining harder than he'd ever seen in that part of the desert. The ground, usually dry and unyielding, had turned to mud that sucked at his boots. Visibility was low, the kind of darkness where you can't tell friend from foe until they're close enough to touch. He and his team had been moving cautiously, every sense heightened. That's when the call came through, urgent, broken by static. The next minutes were a blur, shouts, the metallic taste of adrenaline, the flash of movement in the distance. By the time it was over, the rain was still falling, washing the scene clean, as if trying to erase it. But the mind doesn't work. Like that, in the safety of his therapist's office, the connection snapped into place. This was why the rain always brought the tremor, the short breath, the pounding heart. It wasn't about the weather. It was about what the weather had been carrying. That sound had been the soundtrack to one of the most dangerous moments of his life, and his body had been faithfully responding to it ever since. Realizing this didn't make the reaction disappear overnight, but it gave him something he hadn't had before: clarity. And with clarity came the possibility of change. Because once you know the why, you can start working on the how to meet that signal without fear. How to remind your body that the present isn't the past. How to rebuild your sense of safety one small step at a time. Right here, I'm on this journey too. If you've ever traced a reaction back to a moment you didn't even know was still shaping you. Chapter 5. The unforgettable moment. The memory came back in fragments at first, like scattered photographs left too long in the sun. He could see flashes of movement, feel the weight of his gear pressing into his shoulders, hear the squelch of boots sinking into wet ground. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of rain and earth, and every breath felt cold enough to burn. That night had been one of those rare desert storms, the kind that seemed to appear out of nowhere and swallow the horizon whole. The rain was relentless, each drop stinging against his skin, mixing with the sweat already clinging to his face. They'd been on a night patrol, the kind where silence is more than discipline, it's survival. Visibility was nearly gone. The darkness didn't just hide the path ahead, it distorted it, making shadows stretch and shift until you couldn't tell if what you saw was real or just your mind playing tricks. The rain made everything worse, drowning out the sounds they relied on, masking footsteps, both theirs and the enemy's. It was like moving blind through an invisible battlefield. Then came the voice over the radio, sharp, urgent, cutting through the storm in broken pieces. The words were hard to make out, but the tone said everything. Danger was close. His heart kicked into overdrive. His hands tightened around his rifle. Every instinct told him to listen harder, move slower, and keep scanning, even when there was nothing to see. And then, just like that, the silence shattered. Gunfire erupted, muffled by the rain, but close enough to feel in his chest. The sound wasn't clean, came in bursts, distorted by the storm, echoing in ways that made it impossible to tell direction. Shouts followed, some familiar, others not. Training took over, his body moving before his mind caught up. He dropped. Low water splashing up around him, eyes straining to find the source. He could see the flashes of light through the sheets of rain, hear the metallic clang of rounds hitting something nearby. The air felt electric, charged with the chaos of not knowing what would happen in the next second. And then, amid it all, came the moment that would brand itself into his memory forever. A figure just ahead of him, a friend, a man he'd shared meals with, laughed with, argued with, stumbled. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but he saw it. The way his knees buckled, the way his rifle slipped from his grip. He lunged forward. The rain blinding him, shouting his name, but the storm swallowed the sound. By the time he reached him, it was too late. The water pooled around them, mixing with something darker. He stayed there longer than he should have, hands gripping the fabric of his uniform. The rain hitting both of them like it had no intention of stopping. That was the night the sound of rain changed for him, stopped being background noise and became a warning bell. Every drop carried the echo of gunfire. Every rumble of thunder held the weight of that loss. It didn't matter that he was thousands of miles away now, that the war was behind him. The rain still spoke the same language to his body, and his body still answered. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because what happened that night wasn't just about one tragic moment. It was about how the mind fuses together experiences when survival is at stake. The brain doesn't separate the sound of rain from the sight of a comrade falling, or the feel of mud from the grip of fear. It files them away as one single memory, a package deal, and from that point on, one piece can summon the whole. This is why triggers feel so powerful, why they seem to pull you under before you realize you've gone under it all. For him, that night became a reference point for danger. It wasn't conscious, it wasn't like he sat there remembering every detail each time it rained, but his body knew. The pounding of rain on a roof could mimic the irregular thud of rounds hitting metal. The rush of water in the gutters could match the roar in his ears as he crouched in the mud. Even the smell, the damp earth could drag him back to that field in an instant. These connections aren't easy to break because they were built in the highest stakes environment imaginable. In war, those connections save lives. They make you react faster than you think, see patterns before they fully emerge. But when you come home, those same connections become landmines in your everyday life. And unless you find them, understand them, and learn how to step around them, more through them, they'll keep going off again and again. Right here, this makes sense to me if you've ever felt the weight of a single moment follow you into places you thought were safe. Chapter 6. Understanding the mind-body connection. What that night proved, even years later, was that the body keeps a record far more stubborn than the mind. You can forget details, lose pieces of a memory, even convince yourself that you've moved past it, but your nervous system will hold onto the blueprint of that moment like it's a sacred instruction manual for survival. It doesn't care if the danger is long gone. If the pattern feels familiar, it reacts. The reason this happens is rooted deep in the way the brain is built. There's a part of the brain, the amygdala, acts like an alarm system. It's fast, It's instinctive, and it doesn't waste time on logic. When it senses something it associates with danger, it hits the panic button before the thinking part of your brain has a chance to weigh in. That's why you can be sitting safely at home and still feel your pulse spike as if you're back in the middle of the storm. The amygdala isn't interested in context, it's interested in survival. Sound is one of the quickest ways to bypass conscious thought. It doesn't have to travel far in the brain before it's processed, which is why certain noises can send a jolt through you before you even realize what's happening. For him, the rain wasn't just noise, it was a sensory fingerprint that matched perfectly with that night in the field. The rhythm, the tone, even the way it seemed to swallow up other sounds, all of it lined up with the memory his body had stored. So each time the rain returned, his system lit up like it was back on high alert. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this connection between mind and body isn't just about soldiers or war, it's about the human survival mechanism. When something traumatic happens, your brain doesn't just remember the event. It remembers the environment, the cues, the smallest details, because those are the things it believes might help you avoid danger in the future. It's a brilliant system. In the moment, it can mean the difference between life and death. But once you're out of the danger zone, it becomes a double-edged sword. The very thing that once kept you alive can now keep you trapped. Think of it like a smoke detector that's so sensitive it goes off every time you make toast. The alarm is technically doing its job, but it's reacting to something harmless as if it's a threat. That's what happens when a trigger takes root. The body's protective reflex has been miscalibrated, and unless you reset it, it will keep firing at the wrong times. The physical reaction isn't imaginary, it's chemical. The moment the brain registers the trigger, it floods the body with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart rate jumps, your muscles tense, your breathing speeds up, and your senses sharpen, all to prepare you for fight or flight. This happens in seconds, faster than you can form a single rational thought. That's why telling someone just calm down or it's all in your head never works. By the time they hear those words, their body is already halfway into survival mode. In his case, every rainy day was a fire drill his body didn't know how to cancel. Even when he recognized it, even when he told himself, this is just weather, the signals were already moving through him. It's like trying to stop a train. After it's already left the station, you can slow it down, but it takes time. That's why real change comes from addressing both the mind and the body, not just one or the other. Understanding this gave him something powerful, the knowledge that his reactions weren't weakness or overreaction. They were the remnants of a system that had once been necessary. And that shift in perspective matters. When you stop blaming yourself for the reaction, you can start working with it instead of against it. You can begin the slow, deliberate process of retraining the system, teaching it that the present moment, it's safe, that the pattern it recognizes no longer means danger. For him, this was the start of a transformation, not the kind that happens in a single breakthrough, but the kind that builds with every small decision. Choosing to stay in the room when the rain started instead of walking away, letting himself listen to the sound for a few more minutes than he could the week before, breathing through the tension instead of trying to force it away. These were the behind-the-scenes steps of change, the ones no one else saw but that carried the real weight. The journey wasn't about erasing the memory. That's not how the brain works. It was about changing the association, rewriting the link so that rain could mean something different again. That's the real hidden truth about healing. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about teaching your mind and body to stop reliving it every time the world sends a reminder. Right here, I'm on this journey too. If you've ever felt your body react before your mind even knew why. Chapter 7. The turning point, the real shift, began quietly, almost invisibly, in moments that didn't look like victories from the outside. There was no single morning when he woke up and the rain stopped bothering him. Instead, it was a slow accumulation of small choices, each one chipping away at the old association his body had been holding on to for years. Healing, he discovered, wasn't about erasing the storm from his memory. It was about changing the meaning of the storm in the present. Therapy became the anchor for that process. Week after week, he sat across from someone who didn't flinch. When the conversation got heavy, they worked on grounding techniques, tools that could bring him back into the moment when the trigger tried to pull him under. Sometimes it was as simple as pressing his feet firmly into the ground and naming 5 things he could see, 4 he could touch, 3 he could hear. Other times, it was focusing on the steady rhythm of his own breathing until the pounding in his chest began to slow. These exercises weren't magic. They didn't erase the memories, but they gave him a rope to hold on to when the current got strong. Outside the therapist's office, he practiced in real life. The first time he left the window open during a light drizzle, it felt almost defiant. The sound still made his shoulders tense, but he stayed in the room, reminding himself over and over that nothing was coming for him. The next time, he paired the rain with something comforting, a favorite song, a warm blanket, the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Slowly, his mind began to collect new associations, rewriting the old script 1 page at a time. Support from the people around him made an even bigger difference than he expected. At first, he hadn't wanted to talk about it. There was a fear that naming it out loud would make it heavier somehow, more real. But when he finally told his sister why he avoided rainy days, she didn't question it or try to fix it. She simply asked what she could do. Sometimes that meant sitting with him during a storm, talking about nothing in particular. Sometimes it meant texting him on days she knew the forecast was bad, just to check in. That kind of quiet consistency built something inside him, a reminder that he wasn't fighting this alone. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because what was happening wasn't just a matter of coping, it was a transformation in how his brain processed the trigger. Each time he experienced rain without danger following, he was giving his nervous system new data. The amygdala, that instinctive alarm system, learns through repetition. If enough safe experiences stack up, the brain starts to adjust its calculations, lowering the perceived threat level. This isn't a fast process, and it's not always linear. Some days felt like setbacks. A sudden thunderstorm could still spike his adrenaline in an instant. But the recovery time was shorter, and that in itself was proof that the rewiring was happening. Part of the journey also involved changing his own mindset about the reaction. For years, he'd seen it as a flaw, a weakness he needed to hide. But the more he learned about the mind-body connection, the more he understood that this wasn't about fragility, it was about survival. His body had done exactly what it was trained to do. The problem was simply that it hadn't gotten the memo that the war was over. That reframing gave him patience with himself, which, in turn, made it easier to keep doing the work in time. He even began experimenting with exposure in controlled settings. He'd sit in the car during a heavy downpour, just listening, letting the sound wash over him while keeping his focus on the present hand, the fact that he was safe, warm, and dry. He noticed the details of the rain in a way he hadn't before. The difference in pitch between the drops hitting metal versus glass. The way the sound seemed to soften when it rolled across the hood. These weren't things he'd ever cared about before, but noticing them helped him anchor the rain in curiosity. Instead of fear, what surprised him most was how healing could show up in unexpected places. One evening, months into this process, he found himself standing outside during a storm, not because he had to, but because he wanted to feel it. The water soaked through his shirt, cold against his skin, but he stayed there, watching the streetlights turn each raindrop into a bead of silver. For the first time in years, he felt the rain without the weight of that night pressing in. It wasn't that he'd forgotten it, was that he could remember without drowning in it. Right here, this makes sense to me if you believe that. Changing the meaning of something can be just as powerful as trying to forget it. Chapter 8. The Unexpected Transformation. What he didn't expect was that the rain, the very thing that once felt like an enemy, would become a kind of companion. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen without resistance. At first, the calm moments were rare, fleeting. A light drizzle on a quiet Sunday morning that didn't send his heart racing. The soft patter of drops against the window while he read a book, realizing an hour had passed without the old tension taking over. These weren't just good days, they were milestones. Proof that something inside him was shifting. As the months went on, he stopped bracing for the storm before it even came. He noticed the way clouds rolled in over the horizon without feeling the need to plan an escape route. When the first drops hit, his body didn't immediately go rigid. Instead, he found himself listening, really listening. The sound that once blurred into chaos now came through with a kind of clarity he'd never heard before. There was rhythm in it. Layers, a rise and fall that almost felt like breathing. One evening, he decided to do something he would have never dared to try in the early days. He sat outside on his porch during a steady rain. No distractions, no phone in hand. Just him, the cool air, and the endless gentle percussion of water meeting earth. The first few minutes still carried a ghost of the old reaction, a small spike in his pulse, the faint memory of urgency. Instead of fighting it, he let it be there, like a visitor who no longer had the power to take over the room. Then, without realizing it, he started to feel something else. Peace. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this was more than just tolerance. This was reclamation. He wasn't simply enduring the rain anymore. He was redefining it. What had once been a trigger had become a grounding force. Something that reminded him not of loss, but of presence. The same sensory input that once hijacked his nervous system was now helping to steady it. This is one of the hidden truths about transformation. It's not always about eliminating the thing that hurts. It's about reshaping your relationship to it. He started to notice how rain seemed to soften the world. Streets reflected the glow of streetlights like sheets of glass. The air smelled cleaner, fresher, as if the earth itself had taken a deep breath. The sounds of the neighborhood cars passing, dogs barking, the hum of distant traffic were muted under the steady wash of water. It created a cocoon of sound where everything felt slower, more deliberate. The more he leaned into these moments, the more the rain became a marker of stillness instead of fear. On days when his thoughts felt too loud, he would wait for the weather to turn and step outside, letting the sound and sensation pull him back into the present. It wasn't just a sensory experience anymore, it was a practice, a deliberate decision to choose peace over panic. What surprised him most was the ripple effect it had on other parts of his life. If he could change his relationship to something as deeply ingrained as this, what else could be redefined? The old mindset, the one that said certain memories would always have control, began to crumble. In its place came a quiet confidence, the belief that healing was not only possible, but something he could actively shape. That shift in perspective reached far beyond the rain. It started influencing how he approached other fears, other moments, where the past tried to dictate his present. Eventually, he even found joy in the unpredictability of a storm. The way the sky could change in minutes, the sound of rain shifting from a whisper to a roar. The sudden break of sunlight after the clouds passed all of it reminded him of the journey he'd taken. The rain hadn't changed. He had. That change was a truth he carried with him everywhere. You can't always control what arrives in your life, but you can decide what it means to you. Right here, I'm on this journey too. If you've ever taken something that once hurt you and turned it into a source of strength. Chapter 9, and now. Looking back, he realized that the rain had never truly been the enemy. It had only been in the shape of a memory he hadn't yet faced. Once he dared to step into that memory, to meet it without flinching, the grip began to loosen. That's the quiet power of confronting what hides in the corners of your mind changes the way you move through the world. It's not about pretending the pain never existed. It's about giving it a new place in your story, one that doesn't dictate every chapter that comes after. There's a hidden truth in that process, one most people overlook. Transformation isn't about erasing the scars, it's about learning to see them differently. A scar can be a reminder of what tried to break you, yes, but it can also be proof of what couldn't. It can become a mark of survival, resilience, and even beauty, depending on the lens you choose to see it through. And that choice in the decision, to redefine rather than erase, is one of the most powerful tools we have. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic. Because what happened to him wasn't just about rain or war. It was about rewriting an entire mindset. For years, his body and mind had been partners in avoidance, steering clear of anything that might awaken the old fear. But slowly, through patience and persistence, they became partners in courage instead. That's the behind-the-scenes shift that changes everything, not the dramatic moments, but the quiet accumulation of choices where you decide to stay present instead of retreat. This is why healing is rarely a straight line. There were days when the rain still made him tense, moments when the past caught him off guard. But instead of seeing those moments as proof that he failed, he started seeing them as opportunities to practice the new associations he was building. Each time he returned to calm more quickly, each time he chose to stay grounded instead, a flame was adding another layer of strength to his foundation. The impact reached far beyond the weather. When you learn that you can stand in the middle of something that once terrified you and remain whole, it shifts the way you see every challenge. Obstacles start to look less like threats and more like invitations, chances to prove to yourself that you are no longer who you were in your hardest moment. That's the kind of revelation that ripples outward, touching every part of your life. From relationships to work to the way you speak to yourself in the quiet moments. In the end, the rain became a symbol of what was possible when you refuse to let the past have the final word. It reminded him that safety can be relearned, that fear can be reframed, and that even the happiest memories can lose their power when you bring them into the light. And maybe that's the message we all need at some point, that the very thing we think will do us can, in time, become the thing that sets us free. Right here, I'm on this journey too, if you believe that even the hardest memories can be reshaped into something that gives you strength. If you've stayed with me all the way to this point, I think it's because something here spoke to you. Maybe it reminded you of a moment in your own life, or of someone you care about who's walked a similar path. If that's true, let me know you were here until the end. Drop a comment saying, I'm with you until the end, so I know we're on this journey together. And if this conversation gave you something to think about, or even just made you feel a little less alone in your own story, go ahead and like this video. It helps me see that what we're creating here matters, and it keeps this space alive for more moments like this. If you want to keep exploring stories and insights like this, you can subscribe. It's the easiest way to make sure you're here. For the next chapter, speaking of next chapters, there's a video right here that complements what we just talked about. Click it, and let's keep going together.